G'day fellow flight simmers and random YouTubers. Today I'm going to talk about, I've called it advanced controller techniques. Probably not really that advanced, maybe just some concepts that some controllers may not be aware of. I know that there is one particular concept that very few controllers take advantage of. But anyhow, without further ado, let's push on. Okay, so topics that we'll be covering today, and hopefully I'll keep this video fairly short. First, we'll talk about flow control and sequencing. And when we talk about flow control and sequencing, we're talking about concepts that are applicable to the center controller. Okay, the next thing we're going to be talking about are creative methods to separate aircraft. Sometimes I do a bit of observing on VATPAC, and there are some sort of concepts that a lot of controllers aren't aware of, and I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe this could have, not necessarily criticism, but something that may be a little bit more efficient that the controller could do. And then, of course, we're going to talk about conflict recognition and resolution, and in particular, we'll talk about a particular tool, which really, I'm not sure if it was available. I know it wasn't available on VRC, heaven help us. Who can remember VRC? Or I'm not sure if it was applicable or had this particular tool on Euroscope, but definitely it is on the tool is on VATSIM, and I'll talk about that later on. Okay, so let's talk about flow control and sequencing. As I said, normally most of the flow control and sequencing is done by the center controller, and really the job of the center controller is really to have the aircraft at an appropriate spacing before he hands them off to approach. All too often I've seen in the past where you've got, one aircraft basically vertically separated with another aircraft, but they're literally on top of each other, and the center controller hands them off to approach controller, and the poor old approach controller has to vector them. Now you've got to realise the approach controller only got about 30 odd nautical miles, so really it's you're giving a headache to the approach controller if you're handing off the aircraft all stacked on one another, even though you've got separation vertically, but you really should have some sort of distance separation. Okay, now speed control. It's probably the most effective way of initiating sequencing and flow control in the real world, especially. Unfortunately, it can fall down in VATSIM because different people have different weather systems, and let's just say people do things differently in VATSIM. Just the other day I was observing, I had one guy, he decided to, he was flying from Melbourne to Sydney, from Sydney to Melbourne. He decided, I'll speed it up. I'll speed up and I'll run it 4 times. And I'm looking at this guy, and he's like almost stacked on top of the other guy, and the poor old controller had to vector him around. So, like I said, on VATSIM, pilots do things. Okay. The next method to establish flow control is radar vectoring. I'm not a big fan of this because it presents a heavy workload, and the last thing you want to do, especially when you're controlling on Milk Run Monday, is to be vectoring aircraft. It's probably the least favourable method, and it certainly pilots don't like to be mucked about. So that's really my least preferred method. Now, this is the one that I was talking about. Very rarely do I see VATSIM controller using this, entering a hold pattern. And from my observation, I was doing a bit of observing last night and had a controller vectoring a couple of aircraft, and I'm thinking, does he know that there are hold patterns which you can utilise? Now, for you VATSIM pilots out there, know how to program holds in FMC, because I'll tell you what, if you ever get me as a controller and it gets busy, rather than vectoring you, and if there's quite a lot of aircraft, I'll put you in a hold pattern. So if you don't know how to enter a hold pattern, and more often than not, it's probably in your VMC. Published holds are in your VMC, or if you're not in your VMC, if you're in your FMC. So get to know, and also as a pilot, also get to know how to put a hold pattern if it's an unpublished hold. So that's another topic. We won't get into that. Okay, so we talked about speed control. Okay, now for you center controllers, I encourage you to get a copy of this. I've got this from the MATS, Manual of Air Traffic Services 9.5.15, and it basically gives you all the aircraft speed data. And you can see the highlighted boxes there. Really, they're the speeds that you're most interested in as a controller, especially your descent speeds. On the extreme right-hand column where it says maximum descent, you've got Mach 0.8 and /340. In other words, that's 340 indicated. So if you're an Jetstar Airbus 320 pilot, your maximum descent is 340 knots. And you can see down that whole column there, down the bottom where you've got the Virgin and the Qantas, roughly around about that 300 odd knots. And when basically you can see that I normally give descent to about 330 knots, because most aircraft will be able to do that speed. If I say increase to max speed, it means different things for different aircraft. But if you say make speed on descent not less than 330, well, that's pretty definitive. And we'll talk, and you'll see that on the later slide. So that's what I keep a copy of this next to me, and it gives me an idea of what sort of speeds, rather than asking. Sometimes I do ask the pilot, but if you can sort of have these figures in your head, or you don't have to memorize every one of them, it's a very handy reference to have near your desk. And you can see, like, for example, in the fourth column there, it's got profile to 30 nautical miles with a 280, and that's the speed that normally your aircraft, by the time you hand him off to approach, because what that means, profile to 30 nautical miles before the destination. And as you can see, the next column, M and M to 30 nautical miles, and then M and M 30 to 15, and then minimum 15 to final. So you're looking at where it says minimum 15 nautical miles to final. That's basically what the Airbus 320 and the Jetstar is doing, 15 nautical miles prior to final, doing around about the 170 indicated airspeed. Okay, so that's basically what I won't go too much into it, but when you've got the time, have a look at those speeds and try to memorize them. Okay, talk about speed control. Now, like I said before, there are three ways. Now let's talk about speed control. The first thing you want to do is issue the speed control well before the aircraft stop at descent. It's no good you waiting for when two aircraft are halfway down there on descent, and you start, oh geez, maybe I should be doing something with this aircraft. You should be looking at initiating their speed control well before, or issue the speed control well before the aircraft stop at descent. And now what I've found from my experience is, if you establish a 30 knot speed differential for the entire descent, for the entire descent phase, it will enable you to get a good longitudinal distance between aircraft, and we'll see what sort of distance we're talking about. Now, for example, how would I go about doing this, initiating this speed control? Well, For example, if I wanted to initiate any speed control for the first aircraft, I'd say something like this: for sequencing, make the speed not below 300 knots on descent. In other words, what I'll say is, I could include that as part of the start clearance. You know, for example, I'd say velocity 146, you clear the Lizzie 8 Alpha, arrival runway 25 or runway 16, descend to, when ready, descend to flight level 250, and for sequencing, make the speed not below 300 knots on descent. Or I could wait till he starts his descent and I'd say, you know, for sequence of velocity 146, make your speed not below 300 knots on descent. So there are different ways to do it. There is no one particular way, but just make sure that you've told the pilot before he begins his descent to make, or just as he begins his descent, to initiate the speed control. And then obviously for the next aircraft, you'd say something like, for sequencing Qantas 132, make your speed not above 270 knots on descent. So you've now got this 30 knot differential. I like to make it a little bit, like I said, depends on what's in front of the aircraft, what's behind. I'd probably like to make it about a 50 knots, because now we talked about over the course of the entire descent, a 30 knot differential in speed will result, for jets, you'll get about 6 nautical miles. So, and for turboprops, you get about 12 nautical miles. Now, I like to work, by the time I hand my aircraft over to approach, I normally try to establish more than that, but 6 nautical miles is okay. Really, you really want 6 nautical miles, let's say if you're an approach control, you want 6 nautical miles established when the aircraft on final. But, you know, 6 nautical miles is okay, because the radar controller only needs, as far as radar separation, he only needs 3 nautical miles, whereas obviously a center controller, he needs 5 nautical miles radar separation. So 6 nautical miles is not a bad sort of figure to work with. Okay, so the speed control was one tool that we can use for sequencing. Okay, radar vectors. This is my least likable way of doing things, and I'll show you why in a minute. Okay, so picture this. You've got 2 aircraft, and more often than not, milk run one day, you know, all sorts of things happen. You've got Jetstar 226 and Qantas 345. They're basically on top of each other, even though they're vertically separated, and you think, well, I need to establish a sequence here. So, what would you say? Qantas 345, for sequencing, turn left heading 180. So, you're now starting to establish some sort of track miles between the 2 aircraft. And when you think you've got a sufficient track miles, you'd say Qantas 345, turn right heading 270, or you can say, you know, Qantas 345, track, resume on navigation, track direct to Lizzie plan route. So now what I like to do is, for the aircraft, and not always, but this is what I aim to have, about 20 nautical miles separation by approximately 50 nautical miles prior to the destination. So well before you hand it off to the approach controller, you've got this 20 nautical mile. Now that's a roundabout figure, you know, it's not set in stone, this figure. You know, if you get 15 nautical miles, well, that's fine too. Your minimum is about 6, you know, you don't want any less than 6. So that's radar vectors. Now, as I said, and I've got this on fire, because remember, vectoring places a heavy workload on the controller. So just be aware of that. And yeah, so now I'll talk about a bit of radar vectoring on the approach controller side. We saw there from a center controller, and we're going to show 2 scenarios, and I don't want to be too too involved in this. We're going to look at one scenario where you've got a slower preceding aircraft, and the next one we're going to have a faster following aircraft. Now, that's more or less means the same thing, really, doesn't it? Yep. But I want to really show you the techniques, and there are two techniques that you can use, and I've very rarely seen being used by controllers. And if there's anyone out there that's done it this way, well, and they're watching this video, put your hand up. Well done. And we'll look at departing aircraft in conflict with airborne. Okay, so we'll look at the proceedings when you have a slower proceeding aircraft. Okay, so we've got the scenario here, and excuse the graphics. I've got a bug smasher. I've got a little prop airplane, but it fits the concept. In other words, you've got this slow proceeding aircraft, and you've got this jet at the holding point. They're both being cleared to Sydney via the Docell 1, and you can see by that purple track, that's the original track of both the Q-Link 46 Delta and the Qantas Guy 465 sitting at the holding point. Now, you don't need to be a genius to say, well, if the tower controller gives him takeoff, off he goes. Then you line up the jet, and now the tower controller is well within his right. As soon as that Q-Link 46 Delta commences a turn, for him, he has separation. However, there's only one problem. That jet is also on the same route, and he's just going to gobble up the Q-Link 46 Delta, and he'll be flying through the other guy's level and probably at less than 3 nautical miles separation. So you're going to get an infringement or a conflict of separation, or you're going to have a separation breakdown. So, like I said, both Q-Link and the Qantas 465, both on the Docell 1 SID. Now, and I've never ever seen, I'm not sure if this is in Moodle. This is something that, if the tower was worth his weight in salt, and especially now with the wonderful program of VATSIM, the tower controller can use his little coward button, and whether you want to use the hot key or the hot button, you've got 2 buttons on coward on VATSIM. You've got the hot and the cold. The hot basically allows your microphone, it opens up the other guy's microphone. He doesn't have to hit the button, and you can talk to him straight away. Now, if he's busy, he'll say, stand by, tower. And then when he's okay, he'll say, go ahead, tower. And you, as a really great tower controller, can say, releasing Q-Link 46 Delta followed by Qantas 465. Now, the approach controller, having some sort of experience, and he can see the flight strip, he'll go, oh, right, they're both, okay, you've got a dash 8 and you've got this guy behind him. So what the approach controller can say to tower, he says, Q-Link 46 Delta, cancel SID, maintain runway heading. So obviously now those instructions will be given back to Q-Link 46 Delta, and he'll say, Q-Link 46 Delta, cancel SID, maintain runway heading, contact departures airborne, clear for takeoff. And so Q-Link 465, off he goes, maintains runway heading, contacts approach. Approach gives him uninterrupted climb. And then Qantas 465. And then when you see there's enough separation, then obviously you can get Q-Link 465 to track him back up to Docell. So that's one way. Now, we said, well, faster following. Well, that's exactly what we saw before, faster following. And but this is another way of achieving the same thing. Now, here we're at runway 34 in Melbourne. Oh, by the way, the previous example was assuming we're on runway 27 at Melbourne. Here now we're on runway 34. And once again, you've got both aircraft on the Docell 1 SID. Okay, so once again, you're going to say, well, you know, you've got, once again, we've got the same situation. Okay, and tower, like I said, being a really good tower, he said releasing Q-link 460 delta followed by Qantas 465. Now, what can you do this time? Well, you can say Q-link 46 delta, maintain 4000. Don't forget, here's a turboprop. And don't forget the auto-release features allows him to give him up to 5,000. So you could say Q-link 460 delta, maintain 4,000, Qantas 465, cancel SID, so you've now cancelled the jet SID, turn right heading 020. Okay, so off goes Q-link 460 delta. Now he's and he's maintaining 4,000. Okay, don't forget, so that's important. So now the jet has been released and now he's turned to a heading of 020, so he's flying basically to 020. Now, you know that the Q-link is only at 4,000 and you know the jet, he's at, on leaving 4,000, you can say to Qantas 465 because now you've got vertical separation. Qantas 465 can now be issued resume own navigation instruction, i.e. Qantas 465 resume own navigation track director docel. So you've got that 1,000, and so when the jet passes the Q-link guy, then you can give Q-link further climb up to flight level, whatever, 240 or 18 or 150, whatever level that the jet has left, you can give Q-link 460 delta at that level. Okay, so that's the other thing. That's a technique which I've rarely ever seen used, but hopefully it'll be initiated by future, and it expedites. Not that what I've seen is unsafe, it just places a heavy burden because, like I said before, the tower control is quite within his rights to get one guy to take off. As soon as the guy makes a right turn, because that's one of the separation standards, as soon as he's passed upwind or made a turn, he's quite within his rights to release the other aircraft. But this is being a little bit more proactive and a little bit more efficient. Okay, so the third way of flow control is in holds. Now, I'm amazed by the number of air traffic controllers not using this. Of all the hours that I've observed, very few people have actually initiated this. And I will even bet that probably some people don't even know where the published holds are. Now you can see this is from a map or a chart you can download from the AIP, Aeronautic Information. There's a website. I'll put a link down in the description. But this is the famous Q29 airway, where that arrow is. You can see, and it links basically, it's the common airway that aircraft use to fly between Sydney and Melbourne. Okay. And as I said, holds are hated by pilots and airlines, especially airlines, because of course it costs money. You're burning fuel. Airlines want to make a profit. So, and as I was saying, this chart is from the, I'm trying to think of the actual name of the chart. It's the, oh God, I got visual, it's not visual terminal chart, it's not a visual chart. It's this, an en route chart. Hopefully I'll put the description, I'll put in the name actually, I'm trying to think of the name, anyhow. So now, what I've tried to illustrate here, I've tried to illustrate two published holds. And as you can see, there's that one there called Buller, and there's that one there called Tarix. And there's actually another one right up the top of the chart, Nabba, but I'll highlight two of them. Now, of all my years of controlling, I don't think I've ever seen anyone, and especially on a Milk Run Monday, where really this concept or this tool can be useful in controlling the flow of traffic because these are published holds. So they should be in the FMC of the pilot, whatever aircraft he's flying, because these are published holds, and if he's subscribed to Navigraph or whatever. Now, if they don't have those holds in their FMC, well, unfortunately, that can present a problem. So, and people think, well, you know, issuing an instruction to a pilot to enter a hold is so easy, especially when it's a published hold. Okay, so what would be the sort of phrase that ATC would say to a pilot? Let's say he's coming down on the Q29 airway there, and, you know, got a bunch of aircraft, and, you know, it's going to be a nightmare. You could say something like this to, you say, Qantas 145, hold at Tarex, flight level 150. Or Qantas 145, descend to flight level 150, hold at Tarex. You don't have to give him any other instruction because it's a published hold. In real life, these guys have got maps, charts in front of them. And like I say, it should be in their FMC. And they'll just program it into FMC, they'll get into their hold, and they'll stay at flight level 150. Okay, and you think, well, and then when you've got, so what's the phraseology? Okay, you've got this aircraft in your hold. What would be then the phraseology to get them out of the hold? Well, you'd say something like, Qantas 145, cancel hold, track direct to Lizzie, descend to 9000, QNH 10, whatever, 14. Okay, now that's just one instruction to cancel. There are other, that is not the only type of phraseology to cancel or hold on a pilot. You can say, you know, Qantas 145, expect cancel hold time 05 for onwards clearance, or something like that, you know. So there is nothing definite, but this is the most sort of common one. So that's the sort of, that is something that I've really hardly ever seen air traffic controllers, and it's so effective because you can have these aircraft stacked up. Say at Tarex, you could have one guy at flight level 150, another guy at 170, or whatever, you know, or Tarex. As long as you keep, if you look at the chart, you'll see those blue letters. You've got ALL flight level 180, and you've got CLL flight level 125 in the sort of top left-hand corner sort of thing. So you can see that the lowest level for Class Charlie airspace is flight level 125. So really you could sort of say, you know, one guy at Tarex at flight level 130, next guy at flight level 150, next guy at 1... So you've got three aircraft stacked up in the hold pattern at flight level at Tarex, and they're just going around and around. And then when you see the traffic in front is sort of cleared, then you get the lowest guy, cancel the hold, descend him down to 9000. And then you get, once this guy, once you've got sort of suitable distance between him and the other aircraft in the hold, get the next guy down to come down to flight level 130, and descend all the other aircraft that are sitting on top. Now, that's now what I've just talked about obviously is from an air traffic perspective. Now, you as a pilot, if you're flying in one of these in these holds, there are certain speed restrictions that you've got to adhere to. Now, if you get an instruction by air traffic controller up to flight level 140, so let's say, for example, if the air traffic controller says Qantas 145, descent to flight level 140, hold at Tarex, the maximum speed you can do in that hold is 230 knots. You cannot go any faster. So that's something that you have to be aware of. Now, I'm not sure if it's programmed in the FMC but that's something you have to keep in the back of your mind. Now, between flight level 140 and flight level 200, the maximum you can stay in your hold is 240 knots. And then above flight level 200, you can fly at 265 knots maximum. Okay, so that's something that you as a pilot should know and understand. Okay, now let's talk about conflict recognition and resolution from a center controller's viewpoint, because the center controller takes up, I don't know, about 600 nautical miles or something. You're looking at a vast area, so you've got to be constantly looking around your airspace, monitoring it. And now what I like to do, I like to look ahead usually 200 nautical miles. So I like to see an aircraft's flight path, and I like to look at another aircraft and to see if there's a conflict. Now, you normally look at about 200 nautical miles. And what I do is I look at the routes of the aircraft, of conflicting aircraft, and I basically use the minus key. So in VATSIM, you highlight one guy and you hit the minus key, and it shows you his route and the timings he's going to be at certain waypoints. And I look at it and say, well, if two guys are going to be, say, at Razzie at time 03, well, I need to take action. Either increase the speed of one and slow the other guy down, but basically have some sort of sequencing. So 200 nautical miles is what you should be looking for. Now, VATSIM, best thing since sliced bread. VATSIM has got even a better tool, or fantastic tool. And it's this little beauty. You can see down the bottom, Air New Zealand 321H, which means it's a heavy aircraft, and he's at flight level 380. If you look at the data tag there, and he's going 530 knots ground speed, and he's put in a request to go flight level 390, see, R390, and you've got Qantas 123, and he's going sort of across his track. By the way, that Air New Zealand, you can see that purpley type of you can see that purpley type of text there, and you've got 1157 ANZ. Well, that's just highlighting the aircraft and hitting the route map. So you can see he's sort of travelling in a northerly direction, and you can see the Qantas 123, he's flying in a easterly direction. You can see the conflict tool, that's right. You highlight one guy, you hit the conflict tool, and you highlight the next guy, and then this tan sort of figure shows up. And you think, well, what does all that mean? Well, that's basically showing that if I was to give climb to Air New Zealand, or he's requested 390, and you can see Qantas 123, he's already cruising at 390. You can see there's a conflict, and for the Air New Zealand, his conflict will be at time 03, and the conflict will end, if you look at the end of that tan line, Air New Zealand 1213, that's when the conflict will end. Okay, so that's something you've got to be aware of. And you can see for Qantas, the conflict starts for him at 11:59, it ends at 12:09. So the pilot may say something, Melbourne Centre, Air New Zealand 321 Heavy, request flight level 390 due turbulence. Now after you've initiated this tool and had a look at the conflict, you could say something like, Air New Zealand 321 Heavy, maintain flight level 380, due crossing traffic, expect further climb time 13. So what you've got to do, you've got to keep this guy at flight level 380, because you can't give him climb at 390 because he's going to be in direct conflict with this Qantas guy. So you've got to wait for this guy, Air New Zealand's data tag, to be at the end of that tan line there, and then you can give him, because this tool shows brilliantly that, guess what, for about 10 minutes from New Zealand, Air New Zealand's perspective, from 12:03 to 12:13, a good 10 minutes, there's going to be a conflict. In other words, they're going to be at the same level, and they're going to converging tracks, which means you've got to have 5 nautical miles, and that 5 nautical miles breaks down from Air New Zealand's perspective at time 03 and from Qantas' perspective time 59. So it's not a good situation where you have 2 flight paths converging. When they're diverging, it's great because they're opening up their distance, but here they're closing their distance. So you've got to wait until you have you've got to wait till that data tag for Air New Zealand has passed or at time 13. So this is a fantastic tool, absolutely brilliant. So in the old days, you didn't have this back in, Euroscope. I don't think Euroscope has this. So you had to sort of work feverishly to work out their time of crossing, and it was a nightmare. So that's one sort of conflict recognition and resolution. Okay, consider this scenario. You got Qantas 107 up the top there, and he's flying at 126. Sorry, he's been given descent to 90,000, and you can see that tag there, or that indication between 126 and 090. You can see he's on descent, so he's left flight level. He's at flight level 126, and he's descending to 9,000, and he's only doing 260 knots, and he's a 737-800. And you got the other guy, Jetstar 236, and he's maintaining flight level 170. You can see he's there. And he's doing 350 knots ground speed, and he's an Airbus. Now, you've got converging flight paths. Now, what you've got to be careful of is you may not assign a level based on the assigned flight level of the conflicting aircraft. Okay, so let's say you want to know, let's say Jetstar 236 asks for descent, or you may need to descend him. Obviously, they're coming into Sydney and he's getting close. You may need to descend him. So, at what level can Jetstar 236 be assigned? Don't forget, these are converging tracks. Okay, so your radar separated, minimum separation is going to be 5 miles. What's the level that Jetstar 236? So think about it for a minute. I'll give you 5 seconds thinking time while I have my tea anyhow. Hands up anyone who said 10,000, 10,000. I'd have to say you're wrong. Jetstar 236 can only be assigned flight level 130, not 10,000. You can never ever give an assigned level based on you cannot give a level based on the assigned level of the other aircraft. You can only assign a level based on what level the conflicting aircraft has left. As I said right up the top, you may not assign a level based on the assigned flight level of the conflicting aircraft, because now you're asking for trouble. Okay, so just be careful of that. Have that in the back of your mind. Okay, so I think that wraps it up. I don't want to make this too long. All you potential VATSIM pilots out there, I hope those controllers, the controllers out there have gained something from this. Maybe opened up your eyes a little bit. Maybe want to do things a little bit different. But also, I'm also trying to, if any people out there, I know some of my subscribers are pilots, don't be intimidated by coming online, because we try to help, and I know I try to help VATSIM pilots as much as possible, because I know that you guys don't have any sort of training, and that's because of a VATSIM policy. I won't even go there. Let's not go there. So, I think that'll wrap it up. If there are any questions, put them in the comments, and don't forget, please hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Hopefully I'll get there before I'm 86 years old. Okay, so that'll wrap it up from me, and till next time, see you later and keep safe. Cheers.